Hi, welcome to 10 Years of Marriage Equality. Meet the editors who were there. I'm Tracy E. Gilchrist, VP of Editorial and Special Pride. When marriage was passed, I was the editor in chief of our then parent company's sapphic site, shewired.com. Now I'd like to introduce the rest of our esteemed panel. Hey, everybody. It's exciting to see you.
Hey.
Thank you for being here. And thanks to everyone who's watching on the live stream and who will eventually watch. First, I would like to go to Lucas. Would please introduce yourself?
Hey, everybody. Glad that you're here. I'm Lucas Grinley. I was the editorial director of Your Media back in the day, a long time ago. And now I am the executive director for a nonprofit newsroom called Next City.
Thank you. Wonderful. And Sunavi.
Hi, everyone. Thrilled to be here. My name is Sunavi Brightam. When Marriage Equality passed, I was the managing editor for advocate.com. And most recently, I was the managing editor for Yes Media.
Thank you. Michelle.
Hey, okay. Hi, I'm Michelle Garcia. Up until March 2015, I was the managing editor of advocate.com. When the decision came down, I was the senior identities editor at Mike.com. And now I am the editor of NBC BLK at NBC News.
Thanks very much. And Jace.
Hey, everybody. I am Jace Peoples, and at the time, I was the entertainment editor for The Advocate. And today, I am working for RVO Health as a member of the global news team, working for our brand Health Grades.
And, I want to give you just a little moment. You also wrote something. Would you share what that is?
Oh my gosh, yes, thank you. I am also an author now. I just wrote a YA novel called Twirl, which I would describe as Bring It On meets Heartstopper with a color guard twist.
I love it. Thank you so much. And finally, Daniel.
Hi, everyone. 10 years ago, I was social media editor for The Advocate, and today I'm editor-in-chief of Out Magazine.
Thanks very much. We have a little bit of a clip to show you to remind us of where we were back then.
There's so much more work to be done to extend the full promise of America to every American. But today we can say, in no uncertain terms, that we've made our union a little more perfect. That's the consequence of a decision from the Supreme Court, but more importantly, it is a consequence of the countless small acts of courage of millions of people across decades who stood up, who came out, who talked to parents who loved their children no matter what, folks who were willing to endure bullying and taunts and stayed strong and came to believe in themselves and who they were. And slowly made an entire country realize that love is love.
Wow, that brings back a lot of memories. It hits differently today, I think, for all of us, given the news cycle. But I want to go back and remember our coverage, the Advocates' coverage, in the actually years leading up and the months. So I would love to start with you, Lucas. And would you walk us through the strategy covering rulings for and against marriage, beginning with your time at what was then Here Media, and also explain a bit about the 2013 rulings that struck down DOMA and Prop 8 here in California.
It's so nice of you to start with me and ask me this, because really it's all of these other folks in the room who were the experts on all of it, for sure, because they were the ones covering it directly. And I was just being like, hey, maybe you could do that today. But yeah. Thanks. I will say that I think in Obama's speech, he goes back to say like some things happen quickly, and he felt like this was, one of them, and that was a thing that stuck with people, even though this has been going on for so long before, right? They'd say, "Oh, it happened. Marriage equality happened so fast," and people who were working in it said, "I don't really remember it that way," right? So I feel like that's the thing that gets forgotten about the struggle for marriage equality. It didn't just start even with like the ruling on Prop 8 or on Edie Windsor and striking down the Defense of Marriage Act, which was big the year before. But I think that's where people remember it, is that, oh, it started with Edie Windsor. But actually, by the time that we had gotten to the day for marriage equality for Decision Day, there were 37 states that had already enacted marriage equality in some fashion, right? And that came in all different forms. It was, some of them were at the ballot box, which was literally rights being put up for a majority vote, which people were uncomfortable about. Some of them were in the legislature where people had, lobbied, or it was court rulings, a lot of court rulings. So, I mean, you could go back to all the way to 2003 with marriage equality starting in Massachusetts, right? And how that affected people's lives was even in my own life. I was living in Florida, marriage equality was illegal, and we wanted, my partner, I guess at the time, wanted to start a family, wanted to get married. We said, well, we're going to have to leave Florida. And we moved to the promised land of Massachusetts to Boston so that we could get married, right? So that was how it was affecting people's lives at the time, is you had to navigate this weird, oh, what if I could go get married in this state? Would it count later over here, or would I have to stay there? Am I going to have to sell my house and upend my family and, leave my community? So I think like the way that it played out in people's real lives was that there was this weird cross section of laws that we all sort of became very familiar with. We're like, okay, in Vermont, I could have a civil union. In Massachusetts, I could get married. What if I moved to DC, which is where I moved? And when we moved there was no marriage equality eventually. When we left Massachusetts, we ended up in DC. There was no marriage equality, but then it came to DC. And we ended up getting married on the location where the bill was signed in DC. And then this whole thing just sort of followed us around, going to LA and covering it in California for the Advocate.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. Would you talk a little bit about, the Supreme Court? They consider it, and then the rulings come out in June, and we're living through that right now. It's just waking up early and wondering, are our lives on the line? What's happening? And would you talk about the sense of where you were in the lead up to June 26th, which will be the 10-year anniversary?
So there was, I think it was like a month where rulings would be dropped, and we would have to come in, I think it was like twice a week into the newsroom, just on the off chance that there might be a ruling that came down that day, right? And eventually, we got word somehow that it was going to be on the 26th. I want to say it was probably through the legal teams. But like that morning, we put up a story that said, breaking news, the Advocate has learned that there's going to be a ruling on marriage equality today, right? And so it was by like 7 a.m. that morning that the ruling had actually come down. And we had, by then, a pretty good plan on what everybody was going to be doing. And we'd done a lot of these types of things before, where it was everybody's working on everything. And we wanted to get somebody to read the decisions themselves, right? So that was Sunapee, was like going through the decisions, trying to pull out what Anthony Kennedy had said and distilling it for the rest of us, and then later going into the what all of the no votes had said and sharing that. We had Trudy, who's not here, was our copy chief, and she would have to edit all the stuff that's coming through, but she would also have to keep track of what was going on in the right-wing sector to like share their reaction. I was looking at what the candidates were doing at the time. This was 2015, just before 2016 with the election, and there were so many Republican presidential candidates at the time. I don't remember. Like they used to have to break it up into 2 debate stages. There were so many. And we had people manning photos. It was Christopher Harity was trying to find photos from outside the courthouse, and then from all the people who were getting married all over the country in reaction. It started instantly, like minutes after the ruling came down. There was a wedding in Georgia, and then in Texas, and in Arkansas. It was all over. So someone was watching all that happening, trying to gather footage. And Daniel, I'm sure, talk about more social media. We were trying to get out social media at the time. We had also just an amazing group of people who I'm so glad you're all here, a lot of you.
Yes.
But we had even like at Pride.com, which was our affiliate at the time, Raquel Willis, who is very well known now,
Yeah.
was writing, and she wrote about the reaction amongst trans people, and specifically wrote like a very heartfelt essay about what it was like to live through this moment and then feel like actually there's a lot more that has to be done. And she said like, this is important, but maybe it's not the top thing on my list. So there was also Mitch Kellaway was our reporter on trans issues, and they were rounding up reaction amongst trans people who were also kind of sharing that, right? So we had Zachary Zane, who's also kind of well known now, covering the reaction amongst the bisexual community. We had everybody was doing something that day and was like ready for this to happen.
Yeah.
And it was a really busy morning that day, right?
You think?
By the time I got home at like 6 p.m., there's a video that I found on my husband's phone, and it's just like my one daughter is holding onto my leg, and I have another daughter just on my shoulders, and we're just like hanging out together at that point, right? Because we were exhausted, I think.
Yeah. I love that you brought it around to the personal, because I mean that's a part of why I wanted to do this is that we all work in queer media. These decisions that affect our lives we report on, and we have to move through them. So I want to thank all of you for being here, and I again want to thank Trudy Ring, who can't be here today, but was really such an anchor, continues to be with her work at the Advocate. And I want to go to Sunavi. And Sunavi, I would love to get your take as the managing editor on what that was like reading those decisions.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Thanks for being. It's so lovely to see all of you again. As Lucas said, we knew the decision was coming down. If I recall correctly, it was the last day of decisions from the Supreme Court, and we hadn't seen the Obergefell decision yet. So we knew it was coming. June 26th has also been the date of every historic pro-LGBT decision that came down from the Supreme Court. So we had a pretty good sense that it was going to come down that day. I am not a lawyer, but I'm a legal nerd, and had spent a lot of time in the preceding years covering, along with Michelle Garcia in particular, covering pretty much every other state that embraced marriage equality. And most of them that did so through court cases used an equal protection argument, to the point that we had a pretty standard, almost a form draft that Michelle and I would work on, so that when each state enacted marriage equality, we could turn that story around very quickly. Yeah. So we were familiar with the legal arguments. We had heard the legal arguments in court ahead of time. And then it was really exciting. Like I said, I'm a nerd. I loved reading that decision, getting to read Justice Kennedy's words, which became so iconic. So many folks used those words in their marriage ceremonies. Yes. It's not often that I read court cases that like make me tear up, and that was one of them. So it was really great to be able to dive into that, and to know that I was working with a team who I knew had all of these other avenues covered, like Lucas said, right? So I could, when this decision came down, I put blinders on and went in and read the entire decision, wrote up a piece on that, and then dove into the dissent from the three justices who voted against marriage equality. I loved it. It was great. It felt like one of the times, and I was fortunate to do this several times at the Advocate, where we literally got to write the first draft of history. And that is still one of my proudest accomplishments in my career. Yeah. And it's fascinating to look back now to see where we are. Yes. As Lucas said, I don't think that, like Raquel and Mitch and other folks were saying, marriage equality was important. It was pivotal, and it was clearly not the end all be all, and it has not protected our entire community, unfortunately.
Right. Yes, 100%. We're going to get into that a little bit more. And I do want to be sure to mention, because I don't think we've said the name of the case yet, which was Obergefell v. Hodges.
Yes.
Sunavi, thank you for that insight. And I want to go to Michelle, who is the person who was first with the Advocate. You predated me.
That's true. 2006. Yeah.
2006. Yeah, you predated me by a couple of years. So would you try to offer some insight into the kind of coverage you were doing at the earliest stages of your time with the Advocate? I mean, I will say, when I began in queer media in Hartford, Connecticut in the 90s, we were looking at civil unions, still looking at hate crimes bills, still looking at co-parent adoption. So marriage was like a pipe dream, really. Yep. So Michelle, talk about your earliest experiences.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. As Sonavi was just saying, it was like every day we would we would record like whatever the inch was, just like the small little like, hey, we've got a non-discrimination bill today from Arkansas or whatever. I don't know. But we would always find these ways of like just every day chipping away and finding whatever that news story was. So, whether it was a civil union, a domestic partnership, whatever state it was. And like, I always found that fascinating, like which states fell in where. Like Iowa was early. I think it was the first 2008, like with the ruling, a Supreme Court ruling, right? And then, like just like all these little piecemeal things up until we got to like 37. I think that's what Lucas said, right? 37, if I'm remembering correctly. And it was just like, I think by the beginning of that year, it was very clear, like, okay, well, because, they heard the arguments and the court heard the arguments, and it was pretty clear through reporting from me and Sunny and I mean, everybody, it was like everybody on this call and people not on this, on this call, like have been a part of like that incremental, tiny, iterative daily coverage and then the bigger picture coverage and all that stuff. So it was, I don't know, it was just really fun. And it was also interesting on a personal level to see who in my life was interested in it. Like I would put on Facebook, like, hey, if you're following along, we're watching the arguments in Kansas. And then people that, would be like, yeah, that's great. This is so cool that you're covering, or like, yeah, I care about this because my gay son lives in Kansas, or whatever. So the audience, like our audience was engaged in it. And I think, it gave a lot of pride to people like who lived in different states and were reading The Advocate at the time and just like, yeah, my little state or my town or whatever, did this small incremental step. And we've tried to cover as much of it as possible.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I want to ask you, because we know that progress is cyclical. We are in a backslide. And the march toward marriage was not always forward. For those of us in California in 2008, we suffered a great blow. We were given marriage equality, and then there was a vote, Proposition 8, that struck it down. So it was a really difficult time to be in California. Would you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it was such a fascinating thing. I'm a New Yorker, and then I moved to California. So, I have only lived in some blue areas, but I think the interesting thing about California was that you really had to take a look at the campaign waged by the Yes on 8 folks.
Mm-hmm.
The campaign
by the Mormon Church for the most part.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It was the Mormon Church. And then, it was just like conservative activists. Like it's like half of them, I don't remember their names, but at the time I knew them on like a first name basis. And then, the campaign by the No on 8 folks trying their hardest in 2008 at a time when, still at the time, I don't think, Obama was running for president. And in 2008, it was on the same ballot, right? Barack Obama, who now we know was down with same-sex marriage. At the time, he was very cagey about, being supportive, which it's just so funny to think about now. It's like it didn't, like Joe Biden 4 years later had to push him into being like, hey, we love gays, in 2008, it was just a different climate, even in the state of California. And, a lot of people maybe now, through paying attention through the news might be a little bit more knowledgeable, but, California has a lot of conservative areas, a lot of rural areas, a lot of purple, red areas. So, yes, we have San Francisco, San Diego, LA, but that's not the whole state. And so a lot of people really were driven to come out and vote no, but then also voted for Obama.
Yeah, it was a very strange time. And Sunavi in the chats is reminding us it was the National Organization for
yeah. Those guys. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. We knew all the acronyms offhand. Michelle and I sat like on either side of a cubicle, and it was like verbal volleyball. We'd be like, oh, you're picking this up on Brian Brown? Okay, great. Right. I got Kim Davis over here, like, because this was also the time of Kim Davis refusing to issue marriage licenses.
Mm-hmm.
It was a wild time, and also now having been in the field for so long, honestly, I think it was one of the best times to work in queer media because we got to report on these incredible victories. It was a moment of progress in so many areas.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, both of you. And I really love seeing the back and forth and the discussion about what it was like to be working with one another at that time, because I think it's so important. So thank you for that. I'm going to bring in Jace and Daniel next.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Sorry you all are backstage for a bit, but Jace, I want to talk to you a little bit about being the entertainment editor at the time and what your strategy was. I mean, storytelling and politics really go hand in hand because one kind of leads to the other. And would you talk about the types of stories you were amplifying on that day and in the days following?
Yeah, actually, I would even start in the days up to that. I think that we sort of take for granted how outspoken people are now about their LGBTQ support. But even in 2015, 2014, it was not as common as it is today. And I think outlets like ours were giving people a chance to maybe feel a little bit more comfortable when we would approach them with questions or ask them about certain topics. More often than not, people loved to engage and tell you how they felt. And overwhelmingly, they were supportive. A lot. And when you don't grow up with that kind of support and you don't see that kind of support, hearing those things from people that you admire, that you look at, that are telling stories, it can really make such a huge difference in people's lives. And not just your life, but the lives of other people. If they see people they respect supporting, LGBTQ folks, then maybe they think, oh, maybe what I thought wasn't really so bad after all. Mm-hmm. And so that was always on my mind with every story that we covered and everyone we talked to, because other outlets didn't always give people a chance to talk about that.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Jace. And then Daniel, I think you were the Advocate's first social media director or editor. Is that true?
I think so, yeah. The thing was, because back in the day with the web, people used to just go directly to the website, which is kind of crazy to think about, right? They would just go to advocate.com and then you would just see, and then when, social media evolved and people started getting their news from there, then we were like, oh, wow, well, we have this whole opportunity to use, back then it was Facebook and Twitter, to drive, even more traffic to our site. And I think we have our own challenges today with social media kind of taking over news content, but back then it was pretty like a symbiotic relationship because we could get more eyes on LGBTQ issues and in particular the news surrounding marriage equality. And I remember that day in particular, it was insane. I had never seen so much engagement from posts related to links. I worked closely with the art team, including Christopher Harity, who sadly couldn't be here today either. But he was such a big part of illustrating this journey right through the news and through the images that we were putting out there, the faces, the people that were involved. Right, like I remember I had it scheduled, right? Because we knew a decision was coming, right? And so often we had these memes prepared announcing it, and like everybody shared it. Everybody shared everything, right? We would do quote memes, right? So after Stanavi would go through and get the big quotes from the decisions, right? We pop those in related to each of the justices. We shared those. We talked about Edie Windsor, right? Who was such a big part of this story as well, whose court case had struck down DOMA just a couple of years prior. And so the traffic on the site, the social media on the site, it was just on fire. And I also just want to shout out too, because I dug this out, but I don't know, Lucas, if you remember this, but after Obergefell passed, Lucas had a copy of the decision, a bound copy, that's an orange that I've had sitting on my bookshelf ever since. And so that day is, in addition to social media, I was also a reporter. I had started as an intern with The Advocate, and then I was associate editor. So, and still very much actively writing on the site in addition to doing the social media work. And so, but when I think about, my time with the Advocate, like I look at this book, I think about how it was kind of this real golden age. And I feel kind of like, oh, wow. Like, like we were there that day. We were in queer media. We're at the center of it. And it's just really extraordinary.
Yeah, it really is. I slid my chair over because my copy is very close, but I'm not going to go off screen to find it, but it's very close. And Lucas, I'd like to go back to you and ask you what it meant to you to be able to give that memento of history to your employees.
I think what Sonabi said is that we are writing the first draft of history, and it's hard to be the people who cover your own community. I think, I remember this day, but even more so, I remember days like Pulse, which were really hard to be in the newsroom, right? Very challenging. And there's so many other things that happen throughout a year or the 7 years that I was there, where there are hard days of things that happen. And we would have our morning meeting and you go through, what are the tragedies that occurred today? So there was what Daniel's talking about, what Jace are talking about having a more full view of what it means to be LGBTQ, except for tragedy, I think is important, right? Like there's got to be representation in our culture, and that includes in media and TV and film. So that's why we would cover it, right? And then we did kind of make a thing about asking people maybe more serious questions on the carpet than they were used to getting from other news outlets, because it's like, well, if you're going to be walking by us, we're going to ask you what's going on in our lives, right?
Right.
Or even what Christopher Harity would do about, sharing LGBTQ art, because one, it's not allowed in culture predominantly, but also because we were against shame, right? And all of its forms, and the shame that we experience over our lives. I also thought it was important that we had to cover what the right wing was doing or saying about us all the time, because it was one, to shine a light on it and say, the more you look at this, the more you're going to say, that's not me. If you're someone who might be thinking that you're not sure, right?
Yeah.
So we made that important to do. So it was nice when you could get to a moment like this that people have been working on for a long time, but also was just a joyous moment. That thing that Daniel's describing about everybody shared everything on social media. One of my favorite graphics from that day, I was looking back through old Twitter, was someone, a cartoon character, just like looks into their computer and is like, oh, I'm checking to see what's happened today, and it's just a rainbow blast in their face, because that's how it felt. So it was great to be able to provide people with things that they could share and celebrate. And can you imagine now, like how important that is, that we have to celebrate when we have our wins, in the same time that we're acknowledging how hard things can be.
That's right.
Tracy,
Yeah.
can I add one quick thing to this? Just 'cause
Yes,
I don't
of course.
get it.
Come on, Jace.
Speaking about joy, what Lucas just said, one of my favorite things that we did that day, we had run on She Wired, and it was just a fun, silly, goofy collection of GIFs of cats reacting.
I love that.
Actually on
I love that.
That was on Pride. I wish it had been on She Wired, because this is
Pride.
exciting.
That was on Pride, and that thing did better than anything else that day. But you know what I think is really important is that is such a representative of just pure queer joy.
Yeah.
And we need to hold on to that today more than ever, because there's a lot of darkness, but we have to remember to celebrate our queer joy as well.
Yes, I agree. And I mean, not to make it about me, but I do think that's why my viral moment was resonant, because it was silly and campy and joyful. And, and queer people got it, the holding space moment. So yeah. I do want to kind of move over to, Lucas put us in that direction. So I want to go there, which is kind of twofold. What does it mean to work in queer media? And what was that day like for you personally? And I'll share. I was on She Wired, so I was adjacent to the activity. I wasn't directly in it. I woke up that morning. I saw the decision. It was probably 7 a.m. I made my usual joke about, good news in the morning, which was, I would tweet, I haven't cried tears of joy at this hour since the last time I did a walk of shame home and my car hadn't been towed. So, that was my standard joke for good news. Thing was, I'm a little bit older than all of you. I came out in the 80s, and this was never on my radar. I never thought I could have this, and I didn't live my life like I could have marriage equality. And so I found myself really crying real tears of grief for the life I did not lead. So that was a kind of other side to this. And so that's my personal story about it. And of course, I'm still in queer media. I think it's incredibly valuable to tell our stories from the inside out. One thing I know that Lucas did that I have spoken about on panels was made a very serious and pointed and purposeful shift to covering trans issues before other people did. And that was what needed to happen. So I think about that often. And I want to go to Michelle, because when this decision came down, you had gone to another outlet, which was sure covered queer issues, but not primarily queer. Would you talk about the kind of difference that you felt, and then also share something personal about the Marriage Equality Day?
Yeah, well, it was an interesting day because, okay, first of all, yes, I was the identities editor. So anything having to do with race, gender, religion, anything like about marginalized communities. So that's what I was covering for Mike.com, which RIP was a millennial-led kind of news site. Lots of GIFs. Anyway, so I was covering it, and we got to June 26th, and we knew what was coming after scrambling to get to the office by 10 o'clock in New York, and it was a big day. So I basically was like, hey, if you are at all queer in this newsroom, get over here now. We are like all systems go. And so it was kind of amazing for the first part of the day, because it was just like this celebratory, wonderful, thing that the queer folks, like, we could experience, but also like had the joy of covering it and like bring it to life, and like making all these maps and talking to people and assigning all these cool stories. But then, if you recall, the afternoon, which it's like kind of funny to see Obama talking about the Supreme Court ruling, was the funeral for the shooting at the Charleston church. So my team was covering both. And like, we literally popped champagne because we were celebrating marriage equality, and then had to hard pivot to that. And it was a whiplash kind of a day to cover that. Like, I think about that a lot, and it's like, in the moment I wasn't thinking about it, but then it was like, as it was happening, I was like, oh my goodness, I can't believe that like this is happening, so like in the newsroom there was a lot of joy, and then there was a lot of just like sadness. But then also, Tracy, as you were saying, part of the reason that I felt like it was time for me to go, like to leave for the Advocate, or leave the Advocate and come back to New York, was that I wanted a position where I could kind of do more, like cover more marginalized groups, cover more communities, and like, that kind of thing. And I think at the time, this idea of like intersectionality was like, but we're all queer, like who cares, and it's just like, as a bisexual person, as a queer person, I just kind of was like, yeah, but my experience is just not the same. I mean, I was with a guy, still am, with the same guy. We have
who we love.
He is big ally.
Right. There's no breaking news here, is there?
No, literally no. It's been 22 years. But so, this is, I don't know. It was just like, for me, covering the intersectionality of our community, and like all of the ways that like queer people and Black people, Latinos, just like women, like, yeah. So I don't know. In a way, it's like most of us on this call were probably like, okay, well, marriage, like, and then trans people, we were like, all right, acceptance, growing acceptance. So, I was kind of like, all right, what else is there to cover? Spoiler alert, a lot.
Yeah.
But at the time, I think, I don't know. Yeah, I think that day, that the experience of that day is like emblematic of just like what it has been like to cover marginalized communities in America. It's like profound joy and profound sadness
Yes.
in just the course of like a couple of hours. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. Sunavi, would you talk about your personal experience with Marriage Equality Day?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. As I mentioned, I got to nerd out in the morning on the case itself, and like just beautiful legal writing, which is not a phrase you hear too often. And because we had gotten in there so early, because we knew this was happening, I remember that by 4 or 5 o'clock, Lucas was like, "All right, y'all can go." And so my then spouse, my husband and I went down to West Hollywood for the rally, where many of the plaintiffs had gathered, including some of the plaintiffs in the Prop 8 case as well. And it was just this. It was very organic joy. It was seeing probably even a broader cross section of our community than you do at Pride, which was beautiful. Right. To me, it felt like a very like an organic Pride celebration, because it was, right. And I think even at that time, many of us did, and I think especially us a little bit younger folks, millennials, right, we knew that marriage equality was a big deal, and we had seen it spreading across the country. And we also knew, and Michelle and I did a lot of reporting on ENDA, the Never Passed Employment Non-Discrimination Act, that would have provided employment protections for LGBT and especially T people. So we knew that wasn't the end game, and yet it was a time to celebrate. It was beautiful. I still have photos of my then spouse and I at that. It was emotional. It was joyful. It was great to also go. And for me, I attended the rally, and as a journalist, you're always kind of on duty, kind of covering, but I wasn't sending photos back. So it was nice for me, as someone who had spent most of my time as a journalist covering events, to just go and soak it in and just absorb it. That said, I do believe that our identities improve our coverage. I think that, and I learned this covering Pulse, as Lucas talked about, which I covered for The Advocate. We are able to tell more nuanced stories when we bring our whole selves to the conversation and to the people that we interview, right? Someone who is, when I was covering Pulse, right? The fact that I could speak Spanish and ask folks about their loved ones, and I knew what it meant to find sanctuary on a gay bar dance floor, I got different stories. The content we created for The Advocate was different, and I think had more heart and more soul, if I can say so, than some of the other outlets that were just trying to cover if it bleeds, it leads. How many people died, right? And I think that is still news. I still think that is quality, authentic, ethical journalism. And I think it's a conversation that has continued to happen, and a conversation that we're seeing weaponized by the right again right now. So it's been interesting to see that pendulum shift towards what Michelle was talking about, where there were entire verticals dedicated to identities. And now it's, where can I wear this shirt on a plane? Not sure. Might get harassed, right? And I am a cis person with passing privilege, with all sorts of things. So it was emotional and joyful, and that was nice, because as journalists, we don't always get to cover a lot of the joy.
Right. Agreed. Well, thank you for that. And then I would like to go to Jace for your personal take on the day.
I just remember the amount of, not to keep repeating myself, but the amount of joy in the office, and then getting to celebrate that moment with everyone in there who was affected in some way by that. And then going, like a lot of other people were saying, going out to West Hollywood together as a whole group and getting to really share in that, not just with what was going on with us, but what was going on with what felt like the world.
Yeah.
And I have never experienced a moment like that before. And, I hope to again soon.
Yes.
But I also want to say this, because I'm sure a lot of people may have also experienced this, the other side of that. And that is, that morning, I felt great that whole day. And when I had gone home, I had seen a really close family member had posted some really negative, horrible things about the news. And in some ways, it really sort of pulled the rug out from under me in that moment. But I want to say this, because in the years following, ended up reconciling with that family member. And in 2022, my longtime partner and I got married. And that person not only came around and was at the wedding, they participated in our wedding. And so I say that because I want to offer hope to people who might be feeling like their family members are very anti-LGBTQ, or there's such animosity right now. And I want to remind people that hearts can change, minds can open, and to keep leading with that love that you feel and being authentic. And because that's what I feel like can really change and create moments like what we experienced.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jace. I appreciate it. I want to just go on a sojourn for a moment. One of my favorite parts of the day was one of our colleagues, Andrea Krause, went to Starbucks and got a bunch of coffees, and she asked them to write "Love Wins," but they wrote "Love Wins" with a D.
Why not?
And then we had a rainbow outside the office that day. I don't know if you remember, we're here in Westwood in LA, and there was a rainbow for just a little minute. It was incredible. I would like to go to Daniel for your personal take and response to the day. And you're still working in queer media, so would you chat a little bit about why that's important?
Oh my gosh, of course. I mean, before I worked with The Advocate and Al, I was an activist who had fought for marriage equality. I was president of my GSA at my undergrad. I threw the first queer rally that the campus ever had, which was also a rally for marriage. And I knew I wanted to work in LGBTQ media because the student newspaper didn't cover it. And it was in that moment when I realized, wow, this is so important because, as we were saying earlier, this is the first draft of history. This is a part of the visibility of, not only we're here, but we were here. And so actually that day I wrote my own article about the rally, and then our GSA stuffed a copy of it into every issue of the newspaper around campus. And, to this day, our college archive still has it. But after that, I remember I lived in DC for a bit, and I volunteered with HRC, and I would just call people in, I think it was Maine, because when it was state by state, you would just sort of call them and explain from a personal perspective, as a queer person, why marriage is important, why dignity is important. And so being able to be a part of The Advocate in that newsroom that day, it felt like it was unbelievable, but it also felt it just was one of those moments as a young person where you're like, oh my God, the work that I put in, that we put in as a community can actually affect change, that change is actually possible, right? And so for me, it was a watershed moment. And yeah, I mean, we also at the rally in West Hollywood after, celebrating with my partner, felt very special, but also you could feel the shift as well of especially being with your partner in public, there's a legitimacy now, right? You have to recognize our humanity as people. And that sort of mantra, it gets better, it felt very much real and alive then. Continuing on in queer media, we're in a much different time today. We were sort of, morbidly joking before, Tracy, about, the opposite of love wins, love loses, because that reality is very much, it's present right now, and the danger is real and very possible. And so, as joyous as that day was, we're sitting in a moment right now where that could all just fall away. And so I think that has given me new urgency in this job, right? Not just to fight for new freedoms, but to fight to keep the freedoms we have and to fight to keep it from getting even worse than that. So.
Yeah, thank you for bringing us in that direction, Daniel. I want to go to Lucas just for his personal take as a dad and someone who'd been with his partner for quite a while, and you were already married in Massachusetts. I would love to get your take on that, personal take on the day. And then I do want to move into where we are now and moving forward.
Yeah. We got married in DC because we went to Massachusetts and the place I worked at closed down. But anyway, I will say I had to go home. We had that video at 6 o'clock that night because Nathan, my husband, had been with the 2 3-year-olds for 12 hours that day already. So I didn't get to go to the rally, but it was nice to just go home and sit around and do everyday normal things, I guess. I will say there was I went back and looked at some of our coverage, and I came across what I think was my favorite line from the coverage because it was so catty. There were two presidential candidates, Rick Santorum and Mike Huckabee, who had signed up for a pledge to be anti-marriage, right? Like, and so when the ruling came down, Dawn, who was writing the main bar on the story, she wrote, "The advocate reached out to Pastor Rick Scarborough of Texas, who vowed to set himself aflame if marriage equality was upheld. And so far, we have not heard back from him or his organization about his plans for self-immolation." It's like, so there's a little bit of like, ha ha ha, told you so sort of thing that day too. And then the other thing that didn't happen is Trudy Ring wrote a whole story about things that didn't happen as a result of marriage equality, which were hurricanes, earthquakes, tsunamis, the end of the world as you know it, economic collapse. Like she went and did a
Yes.
whole list, just a catty list of all the
I love
things that
that.
people had said would happen if, there was same-sex marriage, and I thought that was great.
I mean, we've got to laugh. We always have to
Yeah.
laugh, whether
Mhm.
it's dark times or joyful times. We've got to always find we're queer. That's what we do. Well, thank you for that perspective. And Daniel, you kind of pointed us in this direction. I would like to go back to Sunavi, and would you set the table a little bit for where we are now? I mean, knowing that things are cyclical, that progress is cyclical, and we're in a dark time. Maybe talk about that a little bit. But then, if you can offer any hope, that would be wonderful. We don't want to leave on a note of, deep depression.
Yeah, it's a tall order.
No pressure.
Yeah, no
I'm gonna
pressure.
go to
It's
other
fine.
people. You don't have to be the only one, but
Okay,
I
great.
think you're a good place to start. Yeah.
Sure. Well, of course, kind of as we've all been alluding to, and I believe it just yesterday, 2 days ago, the U.S. Supreme Court handed down its case in Scrimeti, which is the largest case regarding trans rights to ever reach the Supreme Court. The court decided to, on a party line vote, decided to uphold Tennessee's ban on gender-affirming healthcare for minors. It is egregiously transphobic. The law only prohibits that care for trans youth. Cisgender youth who access the exact same medical treatments that are prescribed by their doctors in consultation with their family. Cisgender youth can access that care. It's only transgender youth who can't. And this particular Supreme Court ruled that is not sex-based discrimination, and that's fine. Again, I have my own ideas on impartiality. I think that is just factually inaccurate. Right. Like that is discrimination based on sex. That said, the court declined to address that question as to whether trans people are a suspect class. Suspect class sounds bad. It actually means that you should be afforded more protection, and that laws that impact you have to pass a higher bar of scrutiny. So the court did not address that piece one way or another, and my friends in the legal community have said, we'll take that as a win. I believe it was Chase Strangio, the ACLU attorney who argued the case in front of the court, noted in his comments afterwards that the court left open other avenues to continue to pursue trans healthcare, to continue to pursue these kinds of rights that are absolutely should be guaranteed to all people. So that said, the case also did not require states to ban gender-affirming healthcare, right? And again, cis people also access gender-affirming healthcare. Viagra is gender-affirming healthcare, right? Like it is not solely. And I just this was another line we put in every article we wrote, because when Michelle and I were working together in particular, was the North Carolina HB2, the bathroom bill scares, right? Trans people do not assault people in bathrooms. That doesn't happen. That literally has never happened. We've looked. It doesn't happen. You are much safer in a restroom with a trans person than a sitting U.S. Republican senator, frankly. Based off statistical analysis and criminal convictions. So we're seeing the same kind of lies. What I think is different today. And what I would say, particularly to young people and young trans folks, we see you. We love you. We believe in you. We are going to do what we can to protect you. You are not alone. And I think as we were, hearing Daniel talk about, it's almost hard to think about 10 years ago how different social media was and how much less pervasive. And I think that's come with it's a mixed bag, right? We've seen the Nazification of Twitter and whatnot, but we've also found new ways to connect with each other. And my hope is particularly that for trans folks in those states that are criminalizing their existence, that are telling them they do not deserve access to healthcare, that you no longer are in a bubble where you believe you're the only one to experience this. And in the way that Daniel was saying, it gets better. I can't promise that it will get better right now, but I can promise that it is worth sticking around. It is worth staying. It is worth staying one more day, one more week. You will find your people. We are here. We love you, every single one of us. Even if we don't work in queer media anymore, like, we know that you matter. We will continue to fight for you. We will continue to protect you in the ways that we can, even when our federal government doesn't.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sanavi. I feel like it's time to wrap a little bit, but I want to give everyone a little chance for any parting comments that you want to make, because Sanavi, you wrapped that up really in a nice tight bow. So I don't want to ask it of everyone, but I do want to give everyone a chance to say some parting words if you so desire. And Jace, I'll go to you.
Oh, wow. Thank you. I would say, I think one of the best things we could do right now to repeat is to hold on to the joy that you find in everything that's going on right now, because overwhelmingly, there's a lot of negativity right now. And it is not terrible for you to feel a sense of joy and a sense of pride in yourself, in your community, and I feel like one of the best things that we can all do right now is to stand up. If you're in a safe environment, stand up, be counted, tell your story, be you. And that is the best way we can fight back right now.
Thanks, Jace. How about for you, Michelle?
Ooh, yeah. I have nothing. JK. No,
always with the jokes.
I know. I'm sorry. I can't help it. I'm supposed to be a serious newswoman. No, I don't know. To me, I mean, obviously we are living in, as they say, unprecedented times, but as the kids say. But I don't know. I'm a student of history. I am the daughter of a feminist. I'm the daughter of civil rights students of the civil rights movement. Like, I feel like everything that my parents have taught me about the history of this country we're back. Like, it's just coming back. Like, we need to all be students of history in order to think about what's next. And how do we act? How do we cover this moment in time as journalists, and how do we act as people to be good human beings to each other and ourselves? So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I have 0.0 answers, but I feel like whenever we look back on this, like 2025 and 2035 and 2045, we will have some stories to tell. We'll be able to teach the next generation of people like what we learned from this moment, just like we're doing right now.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Daniel, any parting words?
Yeah, recently a friend of mine who's a guidance counselor at a high school in New Jersey, she shared these pictures she had taken of these posters that students had made and hung around school, they were like faux covers of Out magazines. It said Out on the cover, and then it had drawings of Marsha P. Johnson and Billie Jean King and all of these other like just amazing forebears, right? The people whose shoulders we stand upon right now in this moment. And for me, that was amazing, right? I think I had been, especially in the last couple of months, felt some despair, some helplessness. It's like, is everything that we did that all just, are we living in this awful reactionary period to that? But I think it's important to remember that like we have so much power and that we come from a lineage of people who changed the world. And we have that mantle now. And that is an awesome responsibility, but it's also, there's so much opportunity there to make a brighter future.
Yeah. Thank you. Make a brighter day. And then I'll go to you, Lucas, to wrap it up with any parting words as the then editorial director of the Advocate and Pride and She Wired.
Well, it's so great to see Daniel go on to such great success for one, and then also and be so good at this job, and then also you, Tracy, to see you all over my For You page. So I'm really excited about all that's happened for you. But I will say the point about we came up somewhere along the way about knowing that trans people were going to be next, right? Like we did a series actually before marriage equality ruling came down that was called Necessary but Dangerous, because we all sat around and thought about, well, what could happen if marriage equality becomes the law of the land? What would be the unintended consequences of that, maybe? And one is that trans people become this new scapegoat. Everyone saw that coming, and trans people were saying it on the day, right? And then we've seen that unfold. And I feel like there are things that we could take from what happened with marriage equality and the fight for it over decades that will inform not only what we do now to fight for trans people, but for immigrants and for everyone else who's under attack in the modern day. And that is, Michelle was talking about the value of intersectionality, and that's another way of looking at that is the value of solidarity across people, because the strategy has always been fraternity, divide, and the counter to that is always solidarity. And to achieve solidarity, you have to really understand a person, you have to know them, right? So what Jace is saying about tell your story is not like some small thing. It was what Harvey Milk was saying is like everybody should come out, because if you know someone, then that changes your perspective on them, right? There have been studies since then, out of I think it was Florida, right, about the effect of knowing a trans person and like what that does to people's perceptions and how few people still know trans people, right? So like telling our own stories and raising up other people and valuing visibility, I think goes a long way, as does just talking about your own core values and your principles. Like the lesson that came out of Prop 8 was we can't turn this into an argument over policy differences and like the benefits you're going to get by signing a piece of paper. The reason people say love wins is because it became an argument about love and became an argument about your religious values as it connects to love and treating people equally. And I feel like those are the types of things we need to look back and think about now as everyone's under attack, as to how can our values bring us together and how can we achieve greater solidarity.
Yeah. Lucas, thank you for that. And thanks to all of you, Michelle, Jace, Sonavi, and Daniel. Thanks to anyone who live streamed this and who is watching moving forward. It's been a beautiful conversation for me to look back at, and I'm really grateful for all of you and for our community. So thanks very much.
Bye. Thanks, Tracy.
Thanks, Tracy.
Happy Pride.
All right. Are we